Okay, well, thank you everyone for coming today. I don't see, nope, a few more trying to make it on. I want to thank you all for coming today, and if you can, please turn on your video. I think it will allow everyone to have a easier time having a conversation about everything we're going to talk about. And so the first thing I wanted to do was go over the meeting notes from the last meeting, and if anyone had any comments or changes before we just kind of file those away as documentation. Okay, well, hearing no comments on that, just another quick update on the meeting schedule. So we're on the November 4th date, and the next one is November 18th. And that will be the morning before our TPC meeting. So I think so far I've not heard from anyone that this schedule is not going to work out. Okay. So the next thing that I have on the agenda is kind of just a quick review of the various recommendations that each of our communities have put together for the comprehensive plans that have been adopted recently. We have Ozark, Springfield, Stratford, and Willard. And I know Nix is in the midst of working on theirs. Springfield's are still somewhat in draft form. And then let's see, I think Battlefield's working on theirs. And I'm not sure if we have any others in the work, but I think it's really great that while we're doing this process, we have each of our communities working on their own vision while we move forward with ours for the region. And so I just wanted to point out, besides the recommendations that are all tied to transportation, each of our communities have additional recommendations that tie into kind of other aspects of city life. So, for example, Ozark's wanting to match development with adjoining streets. Looking at downtown walkability, a lot of the communities mentioned this aspect of character and walkability and lining up with trails and streetscaping. I saw a lot of that. But then also, making sure to participate with the OTO, looking at how to expand multimodal transportation and the road network. And then again, with trails, Ozark mentioned adopting a complete streets ordinance. And so the city of Springfield, they mention neighborhood amenities such as greenways and supporting that with new residential development. Looking at reinvestment in commercial corridors and the gateways to the communities. And again, this gets a little bit back to those aesthetics and how do we improve those corridors in our communities. Transportation focus included Vision Zero. I don't think I'd seen that in the other communities. Looking again at multimodal network gaps, matching up with the land use, integrating street design guidelines update, adopting complete streets into those guidelines. Placemaking, still being fiscally responsible. That transportation is connected to economic development. Again, gateways, kind of that physical image again. Streetscaping and multimodal connectivity. And then greenways. And this one can tie into transportation when you think about the amount of pavement we do put down on the road, but there was a mention of reducing the heat island effect, and then seeking out funding opportunities, which I know is something that we always talk about being an important part of our transportation, supporting that. So then also supporting that active and healthy lifestyle. And so Stratford, their recommendations including, increasing connectedness between parkland and the surrounding streets, sidewalk connections, their transportation focus goals, looking at road, sidewalks, and trails, looking at the cost of those things, working with the OTO Regional Trails Plan, street maintenance. I think maintenance is big for everyone. And looking at traffic flow. Stratford's mentioned a little bit more about how that truck traffic moves through, as well as connection to their future rail park. And so those are some additional modes that we don't always talk about in all of our communities. And then developing more bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, educating citizens, this one about the rail park, working on signage in cooperation with MoDOT, wayfinding. I think wayfinding was mentioned in multiple plans. And then also looking at some more of those aesthetics as development continues. And so Willard, transportation was kind of their first goal right out of the gate. Looking at those sidewalk connections, relationship to the Frisco Highline Trail, different forms of transportation, so multimodal again. And then walkability, bikeability, connecting neighborhoods to parks, and then financing to help with those facade and streetscape improvements in their downtown, establishing a dedicated transportation sales tax. And so those were the recommendations that came out of the plans that have been developed. Andy, I know that you've been, kind of sitting on with SimCog's work on Republic. That's the other one that's in progress. So Republic and Battlefield, and Sarah with Nixa, but I don't know if anyone else wanted to kind of share their thoughts on where their communities are going. Andy, can you talk about what you've been working on with Battlefield and Republic?
Yeah, I haven't really been involved with Battlefield any. I sat down with SimCog a little and shared some information early on. As far as the process that's been going on in Republic, I know that there's a lot of growth going on, a lot of development, both within the industrial park area and within housing. They have seem to be having meetings all the time with potential developers, so I think there's a lot of excitement about that. There's been some discussion at the committee of needing some additional commercial space to kind of offer a range of options for businesses to come in. I think at the last meeting we kind of went through the SWOT, and we'll get into some of the goals and objectives at our next meeting.
Thanks. And Garrett, do you want to talk about some of those priorities that are starting to come up for Republic?
Sure, and like Andy said, we're kind of just starting to get into this process with SimCog. We plan on starting our transportation stuff beginning in probably spring next year. Some of our, like Andy said, we do have a lot of growth going on, both residential and commercial. So just trying to balance all that out and see what our needs are going to be. That's about it.
Okay, thanks. And Jeff, can you share some of the progress with Nix's plan?
Yeah, right now they're coming along with everything pretty good. It seems like a lot of the feedback that we have has a lot to do with pedestrian access throughout town. Drew Douglas is the one that's working on this for us right now, and it seems like the community has a great need or a great desire for additional pedestrian facilities within the city, and that can include trails and whatnot. But there's a lot of feedback on that kind of thing. So.
Okay, thanks. Let's see, Kirk or Dawn, do you want to talk about Springfield's progress and next steps? Or Eric? So there's a couple of you from Springfield.
We're putting our comprehensive plan together right now with planning. So, we're still receiving input.
Okay. Sorry, my screen keeps shifting to the other monitors. All right, well, thanks. And I don't know that we have any of the other communities in progress on the line. So I wanted to then move on next to kind of start that discussion on our design standards. And, we have basically 7 classes that we apply our standards to. These are based on functional classification, which is really kind of tied to what kind of capacity that roadway should carry, vehicular capacity. And so, we have freeway, expressway, boulevard, which is really kind of enhanced primary arterial, secondary arterial collector, and then we added the rural collector, just recognizing that some of our roads may not carry some of the amenities that we ask for on like collector and secondary arterial, namely bicycle accommodations and sidewalks and those sorts of things. And so what I wanted to do, and let me see if I can figure out how to make this work over Zoom. I have a couple of questions through Mentimeter. So you can either go to the web, I'm going to switch screens here. You can either go to the web or use your phone. Okay, so if I present that and then share. Okay. So if you go to menti.com and then the code is 8077809. And the first question is, where should OTO standards be applied most rigorously? So as OTO moves forward, and we have a number of variances that we get on occasion, but what roadways do you think are the most important to protect the standards that we have currently established? And starting to see some results coming in. And it asks you to kind of rank them in order. Okay, it looks like about half of you have voted so far. Give you a few more minutes. Okay, well, we got another one come through. So it's interesting that freeway is not the top one, but that could be because we've already pretty much established those corridors. Does anyone want to speak to why they think expressway or primary arterial was ranked highest?
Hey, Natasha.
Yeah.
I think personally where the OTO standards should be applied is on the interconnection between individual cities. So like between cities, rather than like you get into kind of the collectors, that's more of like inner city stuff that's covered by the city itself versus where your expressways, your primary arterials, stuff like that is more of going between jurisdictions.
Okay, so more kind of the location and function as opposed to and maybe kind of who like we're more, yeah, like you said, between the communities as opposed to kind of to establish that regional connection.
Right.
Okay. Does anybody else want to comment? Okay, well, we will go to the next question. And that's where I'm asking, where is the maximum right-of-way most important? So our standards, they go between, let's see, so like 110 for primary arterial. Where do you think having that most width available is important? See, and I'll kind of go over real quick. So freeway, we're looking at 250 feet of right-of-way minimum. Expressway, 180. Boulevard, 120. Primary arterial, 110. So the boulevard has just a little extra room for those additional enhancements. Secondary arterial is 80. And collector 65. And the rural collector's at 50. Okay, it looks like almost everyone has responded. So in this one, the expressway and freeway really came up the highest, with primary arterial third. Boulevard, which to achieve that look actually probably needs a good amount of the width that we ask for on that, but it did rank a little bit lower, probably because we just have so few of them in our plan to begin with. But does anyone want to speak as to why expressway is important to have all that right away?
Hey, Natasha.
Yeah.
I did not put expressways number one. I actually put primary arterial as number one.
Mm-hmm.
And my thinking in this was that this is most important for looking at development as it comes in and reserving right away for the future. I put freeways low because if we're going to do a freeway, we're going to do a design and figure out what right of way is needed for a specific facility. There's not going to be a lot of development activity around freeways that we don't already have the right of way we need. So I was kind of thinking about where are we going to have that big gap between what's existing and what's going to be needed for the future. I felt like it was mainly arterials, both primary and secondary.
Okay. Mary, thank you. Oh, her audio is still connecting. Okay, so anyone else want to comment on kind of the order that they picked for this question?
I really hate to say it, but I was thinking just like Frank did. And primary, I'm just kidding, Frank. I ranked I ranked primary arterial as first because of the development as well. And I think that that is really important for any community that's developing or for future development, because your primary arterials are the main corridor where you see a lot of big development.
Okay. Anyone want to claim to putting expressway first?
You know, it depends on what your priorities are here, whether it's future development or is it safety. If it's safety, you know, your higher speeds need more recovery area.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of depends on what the focus of the question is.
Okay. And I think that's a good point, is that each of these roads can serve a different primary purpose. You know, moving people at those higher speeds, providing access for that development. Mary, we are working on a Mentimeter poll. So if you want to join in, just go to menti.com and the code's there on the screen.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, so any other comments on that one? Okay, so then what do you think is the most useful part of OTO's design standards? This one kind of asks you to put these on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being the most useful. So as a community, what part of our standards do you think helps you out the most? Okay, it looks like we got about half of everybody in there. And then while you guys are answering that, can I ask who is probably signed on as iPhone? Just trying to capture who's all participating today. Okay, well, it looks like we've got a fair number of people having answered this, and it looks like the pedestrian provisions come out ranking highest with the full access intersection spacing next. So where we include our pedestrian provisions is on collector, secondary arterial, and primary arterial, and boulevard, of course. So do communities find that being able to point to our standards and say we require sidewalks as kind of an important tool when working with, say, developers or project designers? Or did Dawn find a way just to make everyone answer that?
She's private messaging everyone. I had a question for everyone about the number of lanes and the lane widths. Do you think that that's helpful, or is that getting in the way of context sensitive design? I mean, when we start saying, you know, showing a 5-lane, and it might be better to do a 4-lane with, you know, bicycle accommodations and a trail or wider sidewalks, or, you know, it's Springfield when it's already developed, or, you know, are we making it more difficult by prescribing number of lanes and lane widths for developed areas? And do we still want to do that?
Sarah, I think you need maybe alternates, like so primary arterial, for example. We don't have one primary arterial in Republic that looks like that, or that even probably could look like that, just based on the development already around it. So, but maybe a primary arterial that was 2-lane versus what you guys have shown, maybe one without a median, just some alternatives that we could point to, because we can't really point to that primary arterial right now and say you should go build this. It's just not, it's not even possible really for us. I think it's a good, I think it's a good idea, like if we were building a road through the middle of a field, but most of what we're dealing with is redevelopment along things that used to be secondary arterials, things that used to be collector roads. So
Yes, in some of those cases, Garrett, you know, we have roads that are classified higher on the plan than where they currently stand now. And so, you know, like what Sarah's asking, you know, sometimes we're looking at saying, oh, you should have 4 to 5 lanes here, and it's currently 2 lanes and stuff. Do you guys look to that lane suggestion or anything like that when you are looking at some of those redevelopment opportunities?
Mostly we stick to right-of-way width because we're typically not making the developers make the, like you're not going to make a developer take a 2-lane secondary arterial, make it a 4-lane with a median. It's just not feasible for a single developer. So we try to capture what right-of-way we can during development. But as far as making the improvements, no, we don't do that. I think it's also important to think of, this isn't like a, like pick one and put it on the map. It's like, it's a progression from all these roads were farm roads at one time. Now they're turning into collectors, and then they'll be turned into secondary arterials. So I don't know, might be worth thinking more about like a linear progression of these roads, especially with rural collectors and collectors. I noticed they have different right of way call outs on the specs. I think that's something that we might want to consider making the same so that a rural collector can turn into a normal collector a little bit easier, but just a thought.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think all the rural collectors are located in Christian County, and they specifically asked for that designation because the volumes are not going to get to the same level, but the connections are. And so we were looking for a way to, you know, continue to get that connection, knowing that we didn't necessarily need the right of way width in some of those really curvy, hilly, you know, areas, especially around and outside of Ozark. So I don't
Gotcha.
think Republic has any, but my memory could be failing me.
No, and that's probably why another thing I had was why don't we utilize the rural collector more? So that explains why, because I like all the farm roads in like the unincorporated Greene County area around Republic, a lot of them are listed as collector. So, and there is a difference between a farm road collector and a collector going right through town. So that makes more sense.
Yeah, and you know, we would be open to changing all of that. Of course, Joel, you might want to speak up. We, you know, we need to talk to the county about their thoughts and feelings, and if that kind of right of way would be adequate for what they have in mind. But
Yeah, and I think the rural collectors currently, our policy was kind of they had to be outside of the planning service areas in Christian County. So yeah, there was some very specific things initially, but you know, I think we can definitely have all of that conversation too. And I'm glad to know those pedestrian provisions are important in you know, in helping our communities. And so the next question that I have, just using one word, and this is a word cloud, what's the biggest challenge you have when you go to use our design standards? And it can be something in the standards, it can be something, you know, with the private or public sector. I know it's always hard to think of just one word. You're welcome to write none. It looks like a little over half of you have answered this one so far. Okay, so I want to kind of start with developers is the one coming up the biggest, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But I'm seeing some like consistency, conflicting navigation. Can someone speak to what they may be meant? Is there a problem with the standards themselves or being able to apply them consistently? I know at least one of you put those 3 words in there. Okay. Then let's talk about the developer side. Is it that they aren't aware there's a standard they need to meet? Is it because they don't want to maybe meet the standard? What are the comments on that?
Joshua, I think a lot of time with developers, at least in Nixa, it's the added cost to the developers to meet the standards set forth. We've had a couple of instances where we've had developers come in and say, well, I didn't know that we had to do that. Well, that's part of what we require them to do to meet those standards.
And that sounds like that would be kind of an issue, whether it was OTO standards or each community's own standards. And that's where, you know, I think we've always kind of seen the value of the design standards being regional, that you would hope as the developers go from community to community, that they would kind of be confronted with the same type of standards to follow. And yet we find they're still not always aware that they are there.
Yeah, I think that's why, you know, it's important that it's adopted into every community's plan. Because if it's not, I know we had an issue with Christian County recently where, you know, if it's just referenced, then I think sometimes the developers and the engineers miss it. But if it's, you know, specifically adopted, this is our plan, I think they can understand it a little better. But I don't know if that's everyone's problem or we just had that one instance.
And so it looks like more than one person said prescriptive and then I noticed the variance too being mentioned. Is there some concern there that we're maybe applying them too detailed, or there's, I guess, a lot of effort to make changes?
So sometimes I know it's hard to talk in a group, but I'm wondering if you guys might be willing to email us maybe offline some of your thoughts on this. And, you know, sometimes only one community has an issue, but especially if, you know, we keep seeing the same thing cropping up, if you would all let us know, then we can definitely figure out the best path forward. If changes need to be made, you know, what we can do. So maybe if you don't feel comfortable talking about it, or maybe it's just an issue with your one agency, you can kind of outline it for us in an email, and we would be willing to look at that also if you have time.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Yeah, we're willing, you know, to take input on these things. And any way you can provide it. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead, Frank.
I was thinking about that. I think there's been a big emphasis on the context-sensitive design, and at MoDOT, it's more of a practical design, trying to come up with the most cost-effective solution and looking at public involvement. And I wonder, so I was kind of thinking about how do we use standards at MoDOT, which I'm not in the design department, but it seems like typically it's the minimum that we need to do. And maybe the OTO standards come off to me as more the ideal. And maybe that's where you're seeing some of the conflict or needs for variance, that it's kind of a different context or use of standards. I don't know, it's just some speculation.
Yeah, does anyone feel like we're asking for too much in our standards? Okay,
Yeah,
well.
I agree with Frank on that. I think that is a lot of it is standards are looked at as what's the minimum I have to do, and that's how the developers look at it, and they look at it from a cost perspective. I think what you guys outline is great for new development in an open area. It's something I don't know if we could necessarily apply very well to roads we already have, to right of ways we already have, to areas where businesses already exist. So, and I think that's kind of the hesitance toward utilizing these.
Okay,
And
well.
I think that may get into some of the consistency, the comment on there, because I could see where, trying to apply this to existing conditions at this one location, you may have to make some exceptions or it's not going to quite fit. But then there's another place, on up the road that, you try to hold them to this standard and maybe there it works better. And so I think, that factors in is just the, the different situations when you're trying to apply them as well.
Okay, well, we've got another word cloud. What do you like best about our standards? Okay, it looks like about half of you answered at this point. So one thing I want to point out from our discussion on that last slide to this one is the word complete. And I think that is something we try to kind of be all encompassing in what we're addressing with these standards. Got a couple more coming in. Okay, well, I think this is about the same number of responses we got on the last slide. So right off the top, multimodal and pedestrian, ADA, bicycle, trails, those things really kind of pop up, I guess, as being something that stands out the most, which matches with some of our kind of earlier votes in this Mentimeter polling. So that's definitely something it sounds like you guys want us to keep as part of, or maybe even emphasize in our standards. I also see regional, and that we have some landscaping, inclusive. Having the graphics, that is something that, I think we've tried to maintain with them over time and update as we updated our standards. So does anyone want to comment on any of these things? Okay.
Hey, Natasha,
Yeah.
I've got a comment, and kind of regarding this question and a lot of the others. I went to Build School in Northwest Arkansas a couple of weeks ago.
Yes.
And surprised at the number of communities that either didn't have a metropolitan planning organization or didn't know what it was. So that's in the back of my mind every time you bring up one of these issues. Is, it's pretty strong here, and I guess the alternative to not be part of one or to not know of one, and that would be quite challenging. So I just wanted to mention that as something that's kind of a theme in all of the issues that you're bringing up.
Okay, well, I know we even, among our communities, staff knows who we are, but we still struggle, with the public understanding that there is a regional entity out there trying to kind of help bring all of these issues into one place. So yeah, anytime you guys can help with that too, that'd be great.
Natasha, I have a question about, I guess it's one of the earlier slides, but when we talk about working with developers, how are the cities enforcing these standards? Are they making them part of the city's design standards, the subdivision regulations, or are they pointing to the OTO plan and saying, this is our plan too, and you need to follow it? I'm just curious about how they enforce this.
So yeah, I know it varies from each community. Garrett, did you want to say how you guys do it?
Yeah. So the most of the time, like subdivisions and stuff don't even make it onto these kind of standards because they're mostly local roads. So and they follow our city's adopted standards for local roads. We have had a few that have collector roads that need to be built. And what we make them do is follow the adopted Republic collector road, which is just a 2-lane with 40 feet of right of way. So that's kind of how we handle it. We haven't had one, and I don't know if we ever will have one where we are requiring the developer to build a primary arterial road. That's just not something. We have a couple that are secondary arterial, and how we've handled that is they give us the right of way for secondary arterial, which in Republic is 80. I think that matches what you guys have. But then they can build it to a collector standard.
Okay, thanks. Jeff, do you want to talk about how you do it in NICSA?
Yeah, in NICSA, we work with the developers to do at least part of the roadway, whether it's the subdivision is tying into an arterial or a collector. they'll do like an added a right turn lane or something like that, you know, as part of those improvements, so that when future improvements go through, those kind of match up. We also ask that funds be put toward the improvement for the future road, the development of it, to for the city to be able to put toward those projects.
But in Nixa, you have adopted the OTO plan and are getting the right of way according that
Yes.
matches up with ours. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that's part of what we're asking the developers, and that was why, you know, I had mentioned in the last slide the developers, is because sometimes we do get a little kickback from that, but all in all, I think they understand why we're doing it. So.
Okay. Springfield, I know we match up on classifications, but not always the right-of-way widths and whatnot. But do you want to speak about how that works for your community?
Dawn, can you speak to that?
Sure. Yes, we have our own standards that we follow as far as development goes, and it's based on the classification of the road. We do require improvements depending on traffic studies. A lot of the time it depends on if rezoning of a property causes additional trips based on a formula that we use, then they have to make improvements listed in the traffic study. So, but yeah, some of our standards follow the OTO standards, but we have our own adopted standards.
All right, thanks. And thanks, Frank, for asking that question.
Yeah, thanks for everybody who responded. I guess I'm trying to square the concern about developers and the OTO standards. And based on what you're all saying is that you either have your own standards or it doesn't typically apply to developers. So is the situation with developers that the OTO standards are beyond the city standards and it's hard to enforce it? Or I'm just trying to understand kind of where that concern came from then.
For Springfield, I think that some of the OTO standards are beyond Springfield's requirements. And of course, we get a lot of flack for our current requirements. So going beyond that wouldn't be popular with developers or politically, I'd say. And
Dawn,
somebody in Springfield can correct me if I'm wrong.
Dawn, do you find that it's the right-of-way or the driveway spacing, or what is it that they tend to balk at the most?
I would say that it's the driveway spacing. Access is, yeah, our most, what we hear from developers the most is they have to have access and they have to have a lot of it.
Yeah, when we looked at Campbell, you know, we looked at widening it, trying to apply some, I guess, removing some of the driveways, and we got a lot of pushback when we were looking at that project. When we were trying to do access control.
Do you have any intentions of changing your access standards? Because it sounds like it is a problem, right?
I think we are currently reviewing our some of our standards in city code and seeing what changes might need to be made.
Okay. Do you have any timeline on that?
No.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just thinking I'd hate to back off ours only to find that you guys decide to beef them up a little. So
I don't think that we would go any, I think that our issue is when we can apply our closing of driveways, whether it be at redevelopment or at new development. That's the biggest issues that we're seeing right now. So we need to clear up our code to allow us to control some access points at redevelopment.
sure. And I know that your driveway spacing standards are a little bit less than ours. Are you happy with those? Or are you looking at changing that distance any?
I think while we are looking at our code revisions, that we will take a look at that and see if it makes sense to increase our spacing.
So Jeff or Garrett, do you find having any issues with your own code as to when you can apply your standards or when maybe your hands are tied?
Yeah, ours just it's not as complete as we'd like it to be. So I do lean on OTO standards, especially for stuff like driveway spacing, and that's part of what we're gonna examine next spring as part of our overall transportation plan. Is looking at those standards, seeing what we actually want. As far as spacings, widths, pavement thicknesses, stuff like that.
Okay. Jeff, do you have anything you want to add?
No, Nixa has adopted the OTO standards for all of our streets. So, earlier when I mentioned developers, it's the developers in there to make money. They go in and especially a new developer comes in and they realize, oh, well, I have to do this to meet this standard. It's just a cost thing. That's for us anyway. That's they have an idea when they come in, they have so many lots and then they realize that they have to do this to meet our standards, the OTO standards. And then, well, now we have to add this many lots or make smaller lots or whatever. So it's just a bottom line. They're just trying to make more money, basically, is what their grumbling's about.
Yeah, the developers would put dirt roads through all their subdivisions if they could get away with it. So.
So Joel, I know for Greene County that kind of similar to Springfield, our standards or our classifications line up, but the standards don't always align on the right-of-way widths. But what kind of things do you guys run into when you're trying to apply standards? Oh, you're muted, Joel. See, and I would, oh, there you go.
Okay, we have our own access management requirements. I think on most of our right-of-way widths, we meet the OTO requirements, and some we exceed them, like on our collectors. We have several different classifications of collectors: residential, industrial, and just your average collector. But beyond that, now what was the question besides that?
Well, just what kind of things do you run into when you're trying to apply standards, or what are things that developers struggle with?
Well, I'm the one that put access down there, and we have minimum frontage requirements to get multiple drives. We require shared access points for commercial properties that adjoin each other. So we get a lot of pushback, even from people on subdivisions who have constructed a detached garage and just figured they could put a second driveway in on their 70-foot frontage lot. So we get a lot of people that go through our county commission to try to get that requirement waived. And lots of times the county commission will grant them those requests. So it's access that we get most of our pushback from. You know, if it's just a right-of-way dedication, and Garrett mentioned earlier that most of our county farm roads are collectors, and we require 70 foot of right-of-way on collectors. Most are ditch lines, so we need that extra right-of-way in case we have to put utilities or have to deal with some sidewalks that we have to put in roads that don't have curb and gutter. So a lot of those individuals who do administrative subdivisions kind of balk at having dedicated an extra, 20 foot of right of way in order to get their property subdivided.
So I've long thought maybe we should just get out of the collector business, because it seems to be, a recurring point of conflict that if we got out of, because we're more interested in the bigger roads and the regional connections, if that doesn't just help everybody out. But I'm not sure if there aren't some of you who like having those collectors, and you might have to adjust to, have your own collectors, because you still need the connections. We still need the collectors and the subdivision connections and all of that, but maybe we don't need them to be as prescriptive. And it seems that everyone has a different requirement for right-of-way. So they might not even be doing much good if they're not being enforced uniformly anyway. So I don't know. Does anyone have any thoughts on that? Does anyone love them and want us to leave them on the map?
Sarah, I think that might be a good idea also, because OTO doesn't match the federal necessarily, because they have major and minor collectors, which I don't really care for that, but it is the way the feds do it. So that might not be a bad idea, and just have OTO handle secondary, arterial, and up.
And one approach too is we could have, kind of that standard if a community wanted to follow it, and maybe it's just excluded from the variance process, or, it's just up to the communities to kind of enforce also. So that's something that it sounds like at least we're not very consistent on. Okay.
The city of Nixa, I mean, as far as the collector streets go, that's something that we can use to set speed limits. It's something we can use to utilize no parking and that kind of thing. So as far as we're concerned, we have utilized those standards on the collector street side.
Yeah, and I guess for those communities that have just point blank adopted OTO as their standard, they would then need to take separate action. I think, like Sarah mentioned, if we were to keep collectors, so that might be kind of look at some different approaches there. So I've got, I think, just one more word cloud. Using one word, what's missing from our standards? So there's something that we can help you with, or that you think we should be addressing. And again, the last slide said complete, so if there's nothing to come up with. And this will be our last interactive slide. Okay, it looks like we've just had a handful answer so far. Okay. Well, while you guys are all thinking of some more things to include here, the first ones that popped up were inclusion and diversity, and then inclusion's gotten some additional votes as well. Does anyone want to speak to kind of what that means in terms of our design standards?
I didn't put either of those two, but I'm interested in understanding what is meant by those as far as design standards go too.
Okay, well, again, you always have the option to send us email comments as well if you're not either able to get your microphone to work or you just want to talk about this offline. Some other things that I see here, so complete, that was something, we've kind of seen that in multiple, I guess, uses. And so some think it's too complete or maybe not complete enough. Does anyone want to talk about what that means? Or that they are complete and nothing's missing? Is that the intention?
Hey, Tasha, it's Cole. I put that one
Okay.
just from my perspective with the university. I think it's well drawn out for what we what our intent is and what we utilize the standards for.
All right. Well, thank you. So then alternatives, I am guessing that means basically being able to kind of have a little bit more flexibility along the application of the standards. And I think that ties into the typologies comment as well, which really is also where that rural secondary arterials fits in. And so for those not familiar with the term typologies in relation to design standards, so you have your functional classification, and that's basically how does the road function? It's generally based on vehicular capacity. And then street typologies are more kind of what's the context. And they can either be kind of used as the standard or applied as kind of an overlay for a standard. So Garrett mentioned, they've got, established areas in most of our communities, most of the time we're not building new streets. And so are we talking about, secondary arterial, through a residential section? Are we talking about a primary arterial through a commercial corridor or something that's, maybe a connection between communities. And so, you know, those are some things where typologies can allow us some alternatives and some flexibility, but within certain parameters. And so that's something that, you know, we can explore as well. Any comments on that? So where we've talked about being flexible with our standards, you know, would you guys like to see something with still some parameters within that flexibility? We can, you know, maybe kind of make some proposals based on our comments today. And I have heard a lot about context today, you know, talking about, are we talking about development or safety as our priorities, the progression of roads as, you know, the world develops around them, you know, a collector in town versus a farm road, you know, those sorts of things. Any thoughts? I know somebody wrote typologies down. Okay. Well, and then it also looks like we have a comment on Facebook. Let's see what it says. Developers don't care about Springfield. They are dangerous to blind pedestrians. Most of the time, there's no one working on the project. Can't be sure whether it's safe to get from point A to point B. They don't tell the city. They don't tell transit. They don't tell emergency personnel. I'm guessing this has to do with road work and you know, kind of the impact that might have on sidewalks or crosswalks or other ways of travel. So we're kind of nearing the end of our meeting time. So if anyone wants to comment on either this last interactive slide or the Facebook comment.
Where did the Facebook comment come from?
Someone, let's see. Her name is Carolyn McGee.
That's what I thought. I work a lot with Carolyn.
Mm-hmm. So I know, you know, with our design standards process, we don't really get into kind of what happens during the actual construction phase.
Right.
But Don, I'll let you know, kind of Springfield take that comment and.
Right. And I'm very familiar with the issues that she expressed on her comment. So.
All right. Well, thanks, Carolyn, if you're still listening. Okay, so for the next meeting, that'll be the 18th. I'm going to propose that, you know, as staff, we kind of look over some of the various comments. And if you guys want to email us some things that you think, you know, maybe you would like to see in some of the flexibility side of our standards. Yeah, I think there's a lot of information out there and recommendations and how we can maybe have some flexibility and you know, try to make this something that is easier for you guys to use while still achieving our end goal of, you know, a consistent, connected transportation network that's multimodal. So any other comments on the design standards from our discussion today? Or Sarah, anything else you want to ask of the group?
No, just thank you for your time. And I, for one, know that all of you do a really good job in developing our roads and working with developers and getting really the great connections built that we need. And just thank you for that.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Oh, Mary does say, I'm stuck on mute. I included inclusion in reference to universal design and those 7 principles, especially thinking of both vision, hearing, in addition to mobility considerations. Okay. So we can, you know, look into how that also then applies to the standards that we've put forth as well and provide that back out to everyone too. So thank you, Mary, for that comment. And again, thank you, everyone, and we will see you on the 18th.